Welcome to another episode of our video series of the mechanics of human cognition.
It's great to be back. Thinking about what we're discussing today, it's a heavy one.
Self-governance. Yeah, it feels less like a philosophical idea these days, and I don't know, more like an essential survival skill.
It really does. It's like we need an emergency broadcast about it, given the current state of human attention.
I completely agree. So for our discussion today, we're focusing squarely on that, on self-governance, on willpower, and really trying to answer a central question.
Which is,
Can the modern person, can you, truly manage your own life, your own direction? Especially when, every algorithm and every marketing budget is engineered to pull you somewhere else.
that is the pivotal question, isn't it? I think to start, we have to be clear on what we mean by human self-governance.
Right. It's more than just basic survival instincts.
Oh, much more. Every living thing controls its behavior to survive. But what makes us different, what makes human self-governance so unique is this painful ability to choose behaviors that run contrary to our immediate impulses.
To what feels good or easy in the moment.
Exactly. It's about choosing the long-term complex goal over the simple gratifying reaction right now.
And that ability to delay gratification.
Yeah.
That's where you're saying the modern battle for our own minds is being fought.
And for the most part, being lost. On a daily basis, we are losing ground.
Why is that? What's the core of the problem?
Well, the default human setting is it's fundamentally social. We're wired to mirror the group. Our brains literally want us to fear when others fear, to be happy when they're happy.
So our thoughts and actions have always been shaped by our relationships, by our culture.
Heavily, which is why that ancient advice, know thyself.
To turn inward.
It has always been revolutionary advice because the default is always to look outward for validation, for cues, for control.
And now the digital age has just put that entire mechanism on steroids.
On absolute overdrive. We are living in what you could only call a Noah's anarchy. Constant notifications, advertising algorithms, apps designed specifically to capture your attention and sell it.
It's a relentless system. You pick up your phone to do one thing.
Right, check the weather.
Exactly, check the weather. And 15 minutes later, you kind of wake up and you find yourself about to buy something you didn't need, wondering how on earth you even got there.
The result of that, repeated thousands of times, is what we're seeing now. People becoming, in a way, digital zombies.
That's a strong term.
But it's accurate. They can operate for months, even years, driven purely by this immediate pursuit of pleasure, of without any real conscious intent behind their actions. They're just passengers.
And then they have that moment, maybe on a quiet Sunday, where it all hits them and they ask, what did I do for the last 6 months? How did I get here?
Precisely. And that's why this issue of self-discipline, or OOS discipline, is suddenly a top concern for parents, for educators. It shows just how fast that internal control is decaying.
Okay, so that brings us to the solution. You're suggesting there's a single, critical, revolutionary act to reclaim that control.
The most critical and probably the most difficult. It is simply the act of stopping, of pausing.
I have to push back on that a little. Stopping sounds like a luxury. My job demands I respond immediately. If I just stopped, the whole system could fall apart. How can that be the answer?
It's a fair challenge, but the stopping I'm talking about isn't about withdrawing from your life for an hour. It's a mental move, a micropause.
Okay.
Modern life traps us in this constant stimulus response chain. A notification flashes, you must respond. The automatic pilot takes over. The revolutionary act is just delaying that click by 1 second. And in that second, asking, does this serve my purpose?
Breaking the automatic circuit.
You're breaking the chain. By choosing not to react instantly, you create a tiny space for critical thought. And in that space, you can shift from just managing incoming noise to actually managing your own long-term agenda.
Can you give us a more concrete example of that moment of reasoning in action?
Sure. Think about impulse buying in a store. Retail psychology is built on collapsing the time between seeing the item and grabbing it.
Right. Don't let them think.
Exactly, but studies have shown if you just stop someone at the checkout line who's grabbing things and ask them, what are you buying and why, a huge number will put things back.
Because the pause forces them to use their reasoning brain instead of their impulse brain.
It engages their long-term thinking. The question stops being about the immediate want and becomes about the long-term need. And often, there is no need.
Okay, so the pause is the starting gun. It gives us back our mental space. But once you've paused, you still need to know where to go. A stopped car still needs a map.
And that's the next critical piece. Vision. If you don't have a clear destination, any road will do. You're at a 5-way intersection and you just pick a route at random. That leads to chaos.
It's like playing chess.
How so?
Well, if you only react to your opponent's last move, you're always on the defensive. You're gonna lose. Winning at chess requires thinking 4 or 5 moves ahead. You need a strategy, a vision for how the game ends.
That's a perfect analogy, and our sources emphasize that this isn't just about having a simple plan. It's about having a profound dream or vision.
What's the difference between a plan and a vision in this context?
A plan is a schedule. It's tactical. A vision, a hayal, is a deeply felt, long-term destination. It's a visualization of your future self. The old thinkers called it curvai hayal.
Visualizing and manifesting the future.
Yes, and that vision becomes the ultimate filter for all of your present-day choices.
So how does that work practically?
Well, if your profound vision is to be healthy and active enough to travel the world in your 80s or to be a really present, energetic grandparent,
then that donut on the counter looks very different.
it looks completely different. Every pastry, every late night, every skipped workout is now weighed against that powerful future self. Without that vision, without that profound commitment, every immediate pleasure seems equally valid.
That's a powerful internal compass. Okay, let's shift to the external forces that shape us, specifically culture and education. The common idea is more education leads to better self-governance. But you argue against that.
I do, because education isn't inherently good. It's a tool for loading data. And that data can be used to support incredibly destructive aims.
For example,
You can educate people to be better fascists. You can teach them to be ruthlessly competitive in a way that exploits everyone around them. You can train them to serve a system of pure greed. The philosophy behind the education is what matters.
so if education is just about conformity, it actually hurts self-governance.
It crushes it. And this connects to culture. Think about what some call a coddling culture, or pishpishlama kultur. The focus is on safe, standard outcomes, a good job, a stable marriage.
Which sounds good on the surface.
Of course, but it can cultivate a kind of robotic existence. The person never asks why they are pursuing these things. They are just executing a program they inherited. And when a real crisis hits, a novel one, they have no internal resources to draw on.
So what's the alternative to that robotic life? How do you break the programming?
You have to shift the fundamental drive away from a need to be educated and towards a deep desire to discover.
What's the difference?
A person driven to be educated just wants to reinforce what they already believe. They use new information like ammunition for their old biases. They'll even misunderstand a text on purpose if it protects their worldview.
They're building a fortress.
A fortress of ignorance, yes. But a person with a desire to discover approaches everything with an open heart. They read a book, any book, hoping to enter the author's world, ready to have their own belief system shattered.
They want to be transformed, not confirmed.
Precisely. And that's where true growth, those real aha moments, come from.
This feels more critical than ever because the entire structure of power in the world is shifting under our feet.
It's the great paradox of our time. On one hand, the individual now has this almost semi-divine power because of technology.
AI in your pocket, global communication, the ability to bypass government censorship with a VPN.
Right. Traditional state control is becoming obsolete in many ways, but that power vacuum is being filled.
Filled by the digital oligarchs.
Exactly. The tech giants who manage global attention. They control the environment where we make our choices. They exert a kind of influence no state in history could ever dreamed of.
So we've traded a king for an algorithm. What does that mean for the person who hasn't mastered self-governance?
It means they're in serious trouble. This new system is hyper-efficient at consuming the unconscious. If you lack self-control, self-respect, and self-discipline, your attention, your resources, your future, they will be systematically harvested.
It's a kind of natural selection.
A digital natural selection. The future really will belong only to those who can consciously use this immense power for their own defined agenda.
So you can't rely on the state or other institutions to save you anymore.
They're too slow, the game is moving too fast. The only viable solution is individual enlightenment. You have to grab the steering wheel of your own life right now.
And to do that, you need to master what you call the self-trio. Self-control, self-respect, and self-discipline.
Yes, but all three of those depend on one foundational requirement.
Which is
Self-knowledge, kundini tanama. If you haven't done the real internal work journaling, tracking your emotions, deep self-reflection, then the self you're trying to control or respect remains a mystery.
You can't manage a territory you haven't mapped.
You said it perfectly. You have to know your strengths, your weaknesses, your fear, your core motivations. That's the starting line.
And from that knowledge, self-respect starts to grow naturally,
It does. And something else grows too. Self-compassion.
which people often mistake for weakness or making excuses for yourself.
It's the absolute opposite. Self-compassion is the wisdom to accept your limitations. It's knowing you can't be perfect at everything. If I know I'm terrible at financial planning, self-compassion isn't beating myself up. It's collaborating with an expert.
It's a form of strategic self-respect.
It is. It's about setting realistic expectations for yourself, which is the definition of respecting something.
So this lifelong project of figuring out what am I, that is the core of self-governance.
It's the essential focus. It's the oldest wisdom we have. Know thyself. If you are not actively engaged in that intentional, lifelong process of questioning, you simply can't achieve any of the other self-competencies.
This has been a very urgent conversation. To bring it all together, self-governance today is an act of conscious pausing, directed by a clear future vision and powered by deep self-knowledge. And it's not a luxury anymore, it's essential.
It's essential because the scale of individual power has become so immense. We've agreed that people now possess a kind of semi-divine power through technology. The responsibility for using that power rests solely with us.
Which leaves us with a final, and I think a really critical challenge for anyone listening. If we have this massive individual power, and we understand that self-governance is the key to wielding it properly, what is our responsibility to others? Do we have a duty to help mentor them, to share these methods? If the future belongs to the self-governed, how do we make sure that power is used for the common good and not just for hyper-focused individual gain?
Indeed. That is the question we all have to carry forward.